Okay, everybody ready to proceed? All right, Mary, if you're ready, go ahead and I will call the meeting to order, and we'll take it.
Did you say you wanted a roll call?
Yes, please.
Member Chaplin.
Here.
Member Covert.
Here.
Member Dessart.
Here.
Member DeCiani.
Here.
Member Eka.
Here.
Member Elliott.
Here.
Member Hart.
Here.
Member Healy. Member Krajewski. Member Larson. Member Noonan.
Here.
Member Ozak.
Here.
Member Chalsky.
Here.
Member Renahan.
Here.
Member Rutledge.
Here.
Member Selman.
Here.
Member Tornatori.
Here.
Member Zay.
Here.
Okay, we have a quorum. I'm reliably informed that we do not have any public comment for the meeting this morning. And so we will move on to chairman's remarks. Under chairman's remarks, I would just start by saying, first of all, we have some very important matters to address today. We are going to have what is going to be a lengthy but very important presentation on the state of the finances of the county, as well as addressing some programs related to the money that was given to us by the federal government to be used in specific circumstances. And we're going to begin that process of responsibly allocating the money that has been given to us. I want to say, first of all, a tremendous staff and senior staff. I would ask, by the way, right through the end of the presentation, probably nobody else is going to be speaking, so maybe everybody mute your mics because there's a lot of background noise going on. So I want to thank the staff. They've done a tremendous job. Vice Chairman Zay and I spent an hour and a half on the phone just yesterday. We're in a Zoom meeting going through this presentation, and I know they were working on it all weekend. So Nick and Cheryl and Joan and Sarah Hun and I don't know who else I'm missing, Stan Spiro, who's been fantastic. All of you, thank you so much, everybody who's contributed to this process. It's a long and difficult process, but in order to do what we always do, which is to use the taxpayers' dollars responsibly, takes a lot of work. And we've been rewarded for that work. I'm pleased to report, based upon a conversation that I had with Stan Spear, that in the conversation that we had on Friday, Fitch is reviewing basically every level of government nationwide because of the COVID-19 crisis. And I'm pleased to report that after reviewing our finances, unlike most units of government, they are not going to change our credit rating at this time. That's a tremendous achievement. It's something that's based upon the hard work of our finance folks and the tough decisions and the important decisions and the responsible decisions that this board has made over many years and over this year. So thank you for your efforts in that regard. I'm very proud of the fact that we were able to accomplish that. And I'm hoping we're going to be able to maintain that going forward, because that helps us. And in the state that we live, where financial ratings don't tend to be all that positive, for us to maintain that rating with Fitch is a really positive thing. So thank you to the staff. With that, I would move onward to the presentations we have. We have some very important presentations. And so I want to get right to them. We'll start with the COVID-19 operational and financial update.
Good morning, everybody. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah, you're a little muffled.
Let's see. Is that any better at all, or can you hear me okay now?
That's better.
Okay. So we have a lot of information in this presentation this morning with a couple different speakers. So I'm going to dive right in, and then hopefully have plenty of time at the end for questions. So this morning, we're going to give you a presentation, a COVID-19 update on everything that we know to date. And so we might as well dive right in with the next slide. So today we're going to go over several different topics. The first two I will cover is going to be the current operational overview, what's happening here at DuPage County. Also, we're going to go over a draft return to work plan. And then Stan is going to cover the current DuPage County financial status, where we're at, what the fund balances are. Cheryl is going to give a fairly comprehensive overview of the CARES Act itself. And then we're going to have, we will have Mary Catherine give you an update on our expense reimbursement efforts. And then Chris Schneider will talk about some capital projects that are COVID-19 related. And finally, Greg Bedloff will give an in-depth discussion on the Reinvest DuPage County program. Next slide. So first, an operational update for where we're at and how we're functioning here at DuPage County. Throughout this entire COVID-19, last slide, I think we skipped. I think we're skipping, yeah, there we go. Throughout the entire COVID-19 pandemic, all departments continue to, always have been, remain open and open to the public and functioning. The 421 building here remains open by appointment for all departments with the exception of the DuPage County Treasurer's Office, where they are fully open to the public for their tax payments with no appointments needed. And we have had a significant amount of foot traffic coming in to pay those bills. I think everybody, all the board members have received the administrative order from the Chief Judge for the 18th Judicial Circuit Court. They are still operating, but they have limited court operations through June 5th of 2020. We have been noticing over the last several weeks that several departments are continuing to increase their number of in-person employees here at the county in order to respond to specific departmental needs, such as, increased permitting levels. We have almost in every single department that does deal with routine public traffic, we have our facilities management team has installed plexiglass barriers in those departments to provide additional protection. Next slide. So we have asked all departments over the last 2 weeks, we've asked all departments and elected officials to submit the summary of their employee utilization rates, how many employees are working. We have received responses back from every single department elected official, and our summary is as follows. So the departments that report directly to you, the county board, comprises a little bit less than 1,000 employees. Proud to report we have a 99.2% employee full-time utilization. So we have just a couple employees scattered throughout that are not fully utilized, but departments have transitioned well. Of those 1,000 employees, we have about 33% teleworking and 67% in person, and realize that 67% is skewed greatly because of the care center employees obviously requiring having to go in every day. Of the elected officials, comprising of about 1,222 employees, we have 96.7% employee full-time utilization, with 27% teleworking and 73% in-person reporting. Once again, that 73% is skewed a little bit because of all the sheriff's personnel that are reporting every day. Next slide. So we thought it was important to start to develop our return to work plan. Obviously, a lot of the executive orders from the governor, guidance from the health department is still up in the air. But as of the latest information, June 1st is kind of the date we're targeting. That's subject to change, obviously, if we get more or better guidance. So our goal is to be fully open without appointment by June 1st. If that date sticks with the DuPage County Courts, June 6th, based upon the Chief Judge's executive order. So departments are being asked to individually develop plans based upon their specific operational needs for this return to work. Some general guidelines for those plans that after this meeting, based upon the input from the board, we will then forward this to all departments, elected officials, would be to implement a phased opening approach within each and every department. What we don't want to have is on June 1st, everybody shows up and we just continue on. So we definitely want a phased approach to make sure it's safe and effective. On all of our plans, we want to ensure social distancing requirements are still being met, and that's both for the staff as well as the public. We fully anticipate having to complete additional construction of any more required separation devices that departments may want in order to facilitate the return to work. We will continue even after the June 1st to utilize teleworking functions when it's appropriate and effective for each department. So it will continue to be kind of a split between in-home teleworking, but you're going to see many more people here, probably rotating through. And then most importantly, we want to achieve 100% utilization of staff across the board, electeds, non-electeds, and that would be either teleworking or in person. And then we will continue to utilize any remote public interactions that we can, such as digital submittals, Zoom, et cetera. But we anticipate that the level of interactions definitely going up. Next slide. So we anticipate that departments will incorporate their own measures into the return to work, but we assume that they're going to be utilizing the maybe reconfiguring their work schedules, shifting shifts for employees, or changing the reporting locations, whatever it takes to maximize the employee separation by still achieving the 100% employee reporting. And then, like we said, we'll probably reconfigure some workspaces to help them with that. As we move forward here, our cleaning staff has done a phenomenal job with how we've been cleaning and keeping the buildings clean and responding to any COVID-19 positives out there. But we anticipate we'll have to update our cleaning protocols as we start increasing our building usage. We're also going to be developing a permanent telework policy for DuPage County. Right now, it's my understanding we do not have a permanent telework, but we think that by implementing a permanent one for the long term with what we've learned, it would be a good idea for the county. And then obviously as we come back to work, we anticipate that there will be positive COVID-19 tests that occur among our employees. And we want to develop a set procedural protocol with assistance from the health department, how to respond to that accordingly. Next slide. And at this, I'm going to turn over to Stan to give you an update on the general fund cash balance.
Good morning. The line chart on the left trends the end of month general fund and investment balances for 2019 and FY 2020. Focusing on the blue line, 2019 cash reserves increased through the second half of the year and finished at approximately $70.3 million. Looking at the brown line, 2020 cash reserves balances started above 2019, and with the exception of February, due to the timing of expenditures, cash reserves have remained above the prior year through April. Historically, reserves increase in the second half of the year due to timing of property tax collections. The county's reserves will increase in June, but not at the same upward slope as in 2019. The property tax inflow will be mitigated by lower revenues from sales, taxes, and other revenue sources in future months. Next slide, please. Sales tax revenue. Sales taxes are received 2 months in arrears. March 2020 sales tax was received by the county in May 2020. Looking at the line chart, sales tax has trended favorable to the prior year through March. The good news is that March was stronger than expected and was slightly favorable to the prior year. The challenge will be moving forward as the county will have substantial sales tax shortfall beginning with the month of April. That's when the cash will be received in the month of June. Collections at the state level for the month of April were down $347 million, or 25%. What should we expect for May and beyond? Let's move to the next slide, please. The University of Illinois Institute of Government and Public Affairs has a task force that's focused on the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. They have an economic and physical health group that issued a report on April 9, 2020. The report was what policymakers should know about the physical impact of COVID-19 in Illinois. The report has projected state of Illinois revenue loss for individual and corporate income taxes and state sales taxes. The modeled revenue loss for 2020 and 21 ranges from $4.3 billion in the low severity pandemic scenario to $14.1 billion in the severe pandemic scenario. Backing into the percentage shortfalls, the range is 11% to 35% for the state's upcoming fiscal year. As a reference point, the 2007 to 9 recession impact was a revenue loss of $6.4 billion, or approximately 16%. The 2007 to 9 recession impact on the county sales tax revenue was also a decline of approximately 16%. It's still too early to see where we will fall between the low severity pandemic to the severe pandemic scenarios. But the 11 to 35% revenue decline scenarios highlight the urgency of the response Nick outlined at the April 14th Finance Committee that included, number one, the cost walk down from the 2020 budget expenditure levels, and number two, the recovery of incremental COVID-19 expenditures through the federal stimulus programs. I will turn the presentation over to Cheryl to talk about the CARES Act. Next slide, please.
Good morning. Thank you, Stan. I have sent several emails to the board regarding the CARES Act. We thought it was important just to take a few minutes this morning to review the provisions that are impacting the county, specifically the Coronavirus Relief Fund, which was established under the CARES Act. As you know, only states, territories, and units of government with 500,000 or more residents were eligible to receive a direct allocation. In Illinois, there are only 5 counties in the city of Chicago that met this criteria. Illinois as a whole received $4.9 billion. Of that amount, the $1.4 billion went to the 5 counties in the city. The remaining $3.5 billion represents the state's share. So those units of government who did not receive a direct allocation are eligible subgrantees of the state. Next slide, please. As you're all aware, 2 weeks ago, DuPage County received its allocation. The CARES Act provides 3 basic criteria in addition to 10 additional pages of Treasury guidelines, but the 3 primary criteria are listed below. And as we keep repeating, the revenue replacement is not a permissible use of this fund. Bill Viney actually, our federal lobbyist, emailed me this morning. Congress is currently working on CARES Act 2, which may be passed in the next month or so, which will include some revenue replacement dollars. Next slide, please. Currently, our finance department and the auditor's office are working to compile templates and appropriate documentation for every allocation and use of these dollars. The dollars are for expenses March 1 to December 30th per the previous slide. Any money not used by an entity by December 30th shall be returned to the Treasury. And for those of you who were on the call with Bill Viney, we had a couple of weeks ago, he wanted to make sure everyone understood the main point of these dollars, which is DuPage County is solely responsible for the use of these funds. You are not required, but the county board may add as many subgrantees as you want, whether that's a municipality, a hospital, a township food bank, whatever it is that meets the criteria. However, if you make an allocation and the correct documentation is not in the file when the Inspector General comes to audit, which they will, it becomes a debt of DuPage County, not the subgrantee. So you want to make sure we have the appropriate documentation, that we do not stray from the intent of the fund, or it will create a huge future liability for this county. Next page. As I mentioned, and I think I've sent it out to the board, I can send again, Treasury continues to issue guidelines on the use of these dollars. The reason DuPage County received such a large allocation is because our county agencies are taking the lead to respond to COVID-19 on behalf of all of our community and municipal and other units of government partners. Health Department, of course, every day they have new mandates placed upon them. They are now up to about 50 additional staff to do contact tracing alone, in addition to testing and standing up hotels for quarantine. Every day they have a new mission that is placed upon them. So that is an ongoing and an unpredictable cost at this point. Our Office of Emergency Management has done an excellent job obtaining PPE for our first responders, our nursing homes, and they continue to do so. Our Sheriff's Office has managed extremely well, as you know, in addition to our care center, which knock on wood, don't have a COVID case yet. But in the event they do have a case, hazard pay is an eligible expense under this fund. And it's just difficult to predict right now what our expenses will be. But clearly our municipalities have asked for reimbursement of their COVID costs to date, which we are certainly working on our process with them. Next page. As I mentioned here, just some overall permitted uses of the fund: public health, emergency operations, all of our IT equipment from Zoom, software to bandwidth to our laptops, of course, cleaning supplies. Later in the presentation, we'll talk about some small capital projects. Of course, job training is a big issue. I'm sure we'll be looking, I would expect the board to expand some job training opportunities, especially for our hospitality workers who may lose their jobs. This morning, you will certainly hear from Greg Bedeloff about a small business program. And to date, we have received, the chairman has received a number of requests from Family Shelter Service, PADS, food banks for also support. Next slide. As you know, the CARES Act was an 880-page bill, and it included the original stimulus money. It included the establishment of the Paycheck Protection Program, but it also included a number of other funds. Our finance department and health department are currently coordinating those first two funds that we may be able to receive some funds from. The care center, as noted, received a check from Medicare for some increased reimbursements. So we will be pursuing those opportunities as well. FEMA is another possibility that Marie Snow is coordinating an application for. Mary Keating did receive additional funding for 5 of her funds that you're all familiar with. And today on the county board agenda, she does have $1 million spending plan for the emergency solutions grant that she received as well. Election assistance, there was also a $14 million grant to the Illinois State Board of Elections. I assume the clerk's share will be small, but that was included, and we'll be pursuing that as well. Next slide. On the county board agenda today and moving forward, you'll see COVID designated items. So I know several members have requested that. So you will know when these 161 million in funds are being tapped. It will have COVID designated next to it. As I mentioned, our lobbyist is pretty confident there will be a CARES Act 2. It just may be a month or two down the road that will replace revenues. Again, there's no guarantee, but it's looking like there may be some additional money for elections in order to ensure safe distancing requirements, whether that's a mail-in program or larger polling places. There also might be an infrastructure component at some point. So now I'd like to turn it over to Deputy Chief Financial Officer, Mary Catherine Wells.
Thanks, Cheryl. To ensure that the county maximizes its federal reimbursements, we've set up 2 working groups. One group with representatives from the department, the other with representatives from our elected official offices. We're using these groups to communicate with all the staff out in the field on technical accounting issues, eligible expenses, and next steps. In terms of all the next steps in the reimbursement process, we've been working closely with Auditor Grogan. He's providing ongoing audit advice and direction for us. Initially, we gave the agency's point person written guidance on CARES Act funding. That was on April 10th. Since then, we've had 2 large group meetings, and over the last week, we had individual follow-up meetings with each agency to talk about their particular COVID-19 issues, to explain where we are today in terms of federal guidance and allowable expenses, and to answer individual questions. our focus to date has been on CARES Act funding, but we've also used these groups to coordinate and collaborate with the Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Management, the Health Department, and Community Services. I think Cheryl mentioned this on one of the previous slides, but we don't want to lose sight of the broader range of available funding sources from places like FEMA. So the working groups are, to help provide technical guidance, but also to coordinate this overall effort. The resolution for the new CRF funding is on today's board agenda. Passing the resolution is the first step towards drawing down the reimbursement and maximizing our federal dollars. We're currently working with Auditor Grogan to finalize our process for review, certification, reporting on the CRF reimbursements. So with that said, on the next slide, Chris Snyder is going to talk about CRF capital projects.
Thank you, Mary Catherine. So as already briefly mentioned, we have undergone an initial review of capital projects that would be eligible for payment under the CARES Act fund. These primarily focus on social distancing and or safety of employees and public. So real briefly and preliminarily on the campus improvement, we had an eye toward air quality and isolation improvements, looking at the care center, the jail, the courthouse, and the coroner. These would essentially replace or install enhanced filtering and disinfecting technology and or negative pressure capabilities in rooms to better maintain sterile environments. On the IT, continued enhancements of our teleworking capabilities, improved or new online features for the public, such as permitting. There is an agenda item later on with regard to that. Remote access hardware, software. This could include upgraded and professional conferencing and meeting technology, as well as e-recruiting. In addition to the campus, we looked at some of our other facilities, particularly public works and stormwater. The need to eliminate or reduce in-person testing or monitoring of operations, whether it's our wastewater treatment plants, water systems, and flood control facilities. So preliminarily, these total about 18 million. Again, as mentioned earlier, we have had several discussions with Bill Viney, our lobbyist, to kind of review and confirm these the eligibility of these. This is a preliminary list. Obviously, there's potential for election resources. The scope and cost of those have not been determined. In addition, we still maintain dialogue with other departments as well as elected officials for items that would qualify but not yet have been identified. So with that, I'll turn it over to Greg Bedeloff with Choose DuPage.
Thank you very much, Chris. Next slide, please. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and members of the Finance Committee. I'm pleased to present you with Reinvest DuPage, a grant program designed to provide much needed financial assistance to small businesses within DuPage County impacted by COVID-19 during these uncertain times. Next slide, please. It is recommended that this program would be funded by DuPage County with an initial dollar amount of $7 million of federal COVID relief funds administered by Choose DuPage, along with oversight by DuPage County, as well as members of the Choose DuPage Board of Directors from the banking and finance community. The intent of the program is to help small businesses, independent contractors, 1099 workers, and gig workers with a primary focus on payroll stabilization, utility payments, rent, and other financial hardships. Next slide, please. As this slide indicates, the criteria of the program should be pretty straightforward. We're proposing a forgivable loan program with individual awards of up to $15,000 to small businesses with fewer than 15 full-time equivalent employees and less than $1 million in annual revenue. Eligible 1099 workers or gig workers will only qualify if their annual income is less than $100,000. Additionally, more than 50% of their income must come from 1099 or independent work. In no case will an applicant be eligible if they have already received any other type of COVID-19 relief assistance. Next slide, please. So how will the process work? Next slide, please. Choose DuPage has created a portal for application intake on our website. It is secure and we believe has the capacity to receive the hundreds, if not thousands, of applications anticipated. Basic business information is required, as is a statement of use for funds awarded and an accuracy certification statement from the applicant. Next slide, please. Choose DuPage will review each application as quickly as possible to assure completeness and accuracy. We will make every reasonable effort to work with applicants who provide incomplete information. We will also remove non-qualifying applications from the process. The applications will then be summarized and organized for review by a committee comprised of Choose DuPage experts from the fields of banking and finance, as well as the chair of the Finance Committee of DuPage County or his designee, and a county finance staff representative. Next slide, please. The committee will then review the application and make recommendations. Next slide, please. Choose DuPage then notifies the applicants of their loan status and notifies any award recipients of any additional required information. Signed certifications of the intended use of the funds from the applicants are again required. Next slide, please. Choose DuPage will communicate to the county board as quickly as possible as to the awardees. It is our intent to provide a list of recipients twice a month to the county board for approval by the board and processing by the county staff. Next slide, please. After a period of time, based on the loan application information, such as the amount of the loan requested, the purpose, etc., the grantee must provide proof that the funds were used as intended in the original application. Information is reviewed by Choose DuPage staff, and the grantee is notified that the loan is forgiven. Next slide, please. So the next steps and the budget for this program. Next slide, please. Naturally, Choose DuPage will chart any costs over and above our normal operating duties, pardon me, and provide these costs to the county for reimbursement. We do not anticipate the cost to be extreme. We hope that our current staffing is sufficient to efficiently process the first phase of the loans. We intend to keep the website live for 2 weeks initially. If we see traffic on the website that indicates applications will exceed financial capacity of the entirety of the program, even with disqualified applicants, we will shut down the website and notify the county that we believe we are full for now. Next slide, please. Finally, we plan on an extensive social media outreach. We also hope to get some earned media and will work with the county, chambers of commerce, and municipalities to assure that we are reaching as many businesses as possible and independent contractors as possible. We will conduct webinars in English and Spanish before the program is launched to assure that we are effectively communicating as much as possible about the program to the DuPage County business community. Thank you very much.
Okay, that is the first of our presentations, and thank you very much, Greg, for that. And actually, that's both of them combined in one presentation. So at this point, I am going to open it up to discussion. I am going to try to do this by parts of the presentation. Otherwise, it's going to be a bit of free-for-all. So I will start with any discussion or comments relative to the current operation of the county itself, not budgetary issues, but operation of the county, including the plan, the potential return to work plan. Does anyone have any discussions with respect to that? Member Hart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have a question on the development of the teleworking policy. So Nick, just to clarify, will those policies be set at the department level, or is there going to be one DuPage County teleworking policy? I thought you said the latter, but I just wanted to confirm.
Yes, Member Hart, there will be one single teleworking policy that will be approved by the county board when it's completed and worked out.
Okay, great.
I would expect there to be some feedback from the departments, but if we don't have some consistency, then there's going to be some fight between the departments of
right.
As to who gets to work from home and who doesn't. Rosa?
Thank you, Chairman. Just to clarify, there is currently no telecommuting policy. Is that correct?
That's my understanding that there is,
Okay.
but I will defer to, I don't know if Margaret Ewing is on the call here, but
Okay.
maybe we could unmute her and she could verify that.
Is
Obviously, there's
that is
department
correct.
by
That's
department.
correct.
There is nothing on paper right now. Okay,
Yes,
thank
ma'am.
you.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Any other questions, Member Krajewski?
Real quick, Nick, on the utilization you put out there, we were skewed because of the care center, and we were skewed by the sheriff for the elected officials. Can you just send me, I don't need, now, but just at some point, just the detail by departments and by elected officials?
Absolutely. And when I said,
That's all I need. That's it. Just send it to me.
no problem.
Thanks.
Okay, any other discussion on this aspect of the presentation before we get into some of the money issues? Okay, hearing and seeing none, then moving on to the financial status of the county, the revenue and so forth. Member Pachowski, then Member Elliott.
I had a question regarding when the presentation mentioned a team, it was reps from each department and each elected official. Did the county board have members on this team or not?
The team that compiled the financial numbers?
Correct.
I can answer that question, Chairman Larson. So when we talked about the team, that's more the reimbursement team. So we're dealing with individual departments and elected officials to come up with their expenses. And so what we've developed is we have a consistent team in finance across all departments, elected officials, to provide the overall guidance. And then each and every department and elected official is creating their own team, because this is going to be a year and a half, 2-year process for consistency, so that we know we can capture all of the expenses out there. So they are putting their own team together, but we are kind of the umbrella team.
But they mentioned a meeting of April 21st and April 27th. Did we have county board members at that meeting?
There were, so it was a Zoom, and what it was a reimbursement meeting. No, there were no county board members on that. But what we did is we just provided general guidance to them about what kind of files and numbers we're looking for. And that was a purpose of that initial kickoff meeting for reimbursements.
Shouldn't we also be dealing with the other stakeholders? I mean, the employees have representation, so maybe local 150 or 399, the townships, maybe they have something to say, and maybe the mayors and managers. Should we be expanding this, or should we be leaving it just to departments and elected officials, Nick?
That's a great question. So the reimbursement team that's headed up in finance is focusing on the county operations and the county reimbursement, our expenses for reimbursement. Cheryl is dealing with the other electeds outside of DuPage County, the municipalities, the townships. So she's dealing with that aspect and providing guidance for that group.
But our employees don't have any input who are represented by unions. It seems to me they're a stakeholder as well.
Well, like I said, we are in constant contact with like the 399, 150, dealing with them. I mean, they've been great partners in this, how we've been more on a return to work and that aspect. But from the reimbursement side of our expenses, they haven't been involved in that, but they are involved in the operational side without a doubt.
I have one final question. The report says advice, guidance, and coordination with the auditor's office. I would think that we'd want to do that through the finance committee, because we're the ones that's going to vote on all of this. And it seems to me we might be better to handle all of that rather than the auditors, 5 or 6 employees, and we're ultimately going to make the decision anyway. So I was just curious why we did not include the finance committee either with the auditor.
Well, the finance committee and ultimately the county board will be the body that votes on every single function that goes through there. All the capital projects we're going to be taking through this group individually. Any programs like the small business loan program, like a reimbursement program for municipalities, will be voted on by this group. Our involvement of the auditor in this had an eye towards, since we know on the back end, and Cheryl mentioned it in her presentation, is the Attorney General will audit every single body that received money. And we wanted to have an auditor's eye on it at the very beginning, so that we can have everything in place that we need to be ready for the federal audit. And that's right.
$161 million, the auditor's going to have the staff of what he has to properly monitor this, so I don't have any issues later on when it comes to finance, because I'm not there for each meeting. I'm just concerned about whether or not it's going to be able to be properly handled due to manpower, and maybe finance has more employees, they might be able to assist them.
Nick, let me jump in here for a second, because I think we're sort of getting off the rails on the discussion here. This aspect of the discussion is talking about the current financial state of the county and how we are tracking our specific COVID-19.
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought it covered the other. I'm sorry, I'm done.
As a county, there's going to be a long discussion, many meetings that we're going to be involved in. We're going to be voting this afternoon on $7 million out of that $161 million.
Thank you.
That would go to the small business thing. So there's a lot more discussion that's going to take place. They're not making the broader decisions. We're talking about the narrower aspect of that.
Right.
So with that, I see Member Elliott, then Member Eckhoff, then Member Ozak.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I think Member Pacholski addressed my issues.
Okay, Member Eckhoff. You're on mute. You got to turn your mic on.
I hope I'm not jumping into the wrong part of the conversation, but I know that if in the event we give any of the money to another governmental unit, it said that the county is still responsible for the way that they use that money. I'm assuming if we do that, we're going to use an IGA, and I would just suggest that we put some type of indemnification clause in for the sub-grantee to be responsible in the event they don't use the funds properly and we're on the hook for it. My second question is regarding the CARE program. I'm assuming, unlike the PPP, that no churches or schools are going to be involved in that. It's just strictly for-profit businesses.
You mean for the small business loan?
Yeah.
Mr. DuPage can speak to that. We haven't gotten to that point of the discussion, so let's.
That's why I said I might be jumping in too early.
Just one point at a time. Member Healy followed, or actually, Member Ozak, then Member Healy.
Okay, being that Grant already brought it up, regarding money going to the other government entities, do you want to get into that now, or do you want to hold off?
Chairman?
Yes, Member Ozak.
I'm sorry, I was muted. I have a question about the small business loan, so put me in the queue.
Sure. All right, Member Healy, go ahead. If we want to discuss that, I mean, we haven't fully formulated the plan with respect to that. Let me just speak to that issue briefly, because we did talk about this yesterday. Ultimately, there's going to be an issue. Some of the municipalities have come to us and said, hey, why don't you just give us all the money based upon population and let us decide how to spend it? Well, that's not the way this is going to work. We are fiduciary responsible for all the money that is spent. There will be a discussion with the municipalities about reimbursements. We are asking them initially to provide us information regarding what they can document in terms of COVID-19 related expenses over the last couple of months. The discussion I brought up yesterday with the senior staff was, I'd like to see a longer term plan from these municipalities as to what they need, so we can identify what real expenditures they have, because every dollar we provide to them is a dollar we can't provide to the public, that we can't provide to the business loan, that we can't provide for doing our own projects here at the county. So those are all matters for consideration. With that, Member Healy, go ahead, then Member Ozak.
Yeah, I just want to say that the easiest way to handle that is CDBG has a requirement that any money that this county gives out, if it is incorrectly done, that we have to repay it to the CDBG pot. And we actually have agreements already in place. The wording of it is already there, that when we give money to any entity, they too agree that if for any reason whatsoever the federal government asks us to give back the money, they have to give it to us. So what I would say is just turn to Mary Keating for the wording that's there. You can make it a simple form for any dollar that goes out of the county, that if we for any reason are required to repay it for the federal government, no matter what the reason is, they are required to give it back to us. And that should be able to protect the county the best. And it's something that they should be familiar with, because they already sign it every time they do a CDBG grant. That's all.
Idea, Member Ozak.
Thank you, Chairman Larson. Is it okay to move on to the small business loan?
Well, we've got a few other areas to cover first. Let's
okay.
If we've covered this topic first, and then we'll come back to it. I promise I'll give you a chance on that. Any other discussion of the current financial status or the potential program that we're still working on to address reimbursements to the municipalities? Member Krajewski, yes, your hand up.
Yeah, two real quick questions. We got that 161 million, right? Correct already?
Yes.
Is it earning interest? And then what can we do with the interest? I don't need the answer, but I assume that's a lot of interest if 161 million in a bank.
I have an interest in the interest as well. I asked that question and I don't.
Okay. Yeah. As soon as let's just get back on that. And then the second thing, as far as the capital projects, we're at that point, right? We talked about campus capital projects.
That's what we can talk about. Yeah.
Yeah. Just real quick, and staff can get back to me, but you know, we talked about the courthouse and the air and social distancing, COVID-related expenses. Would a satellite courthouse be one to help social distancing? They can get back to me on that. I don't need to know, but we could look at that.
Fair enough. We'll talk about that. Any other comments on this portion of the brief? Comments, discussions? Okay. Hearing none, then the next issue would be the, let's see here. All right, so we started talking about the capital projects, and we're certainly going to look at ways of spending the money that's legitimately within. Keep in mind, one of the biggest restrictions that we're going to have to deal with this money is that it has to be spent by the end of the year. So it'd be great to say, here's a capital project that's going to take place over the next 3 years. We have to find a way to structure it so the money is spent by the end of the calendar year for us to be able to take advantage of that as a county. But there are certain projects that clearly relate to it, having clean air in our courthouse and that sort of thing. Whatever needs to be done over at the care center, obviously that can be related to COVID-19 related expenses. So we're looking at that. And then, all right, let's move on to the Reinvest DuPage program. I know people have comments on that. Member Desart, then Member Ozog, then Member DeCiani.
Thank you. I'm going to yield to Member Ozog because she had her hand up first, and then I'll go second. Thank you.
Okay, Member Ozog.
Thank you, Member Desart, and thank you. Oh, thank you, Chairman. Okay, my question about the $7 million is where or how that amount was decided upon. It's only 4% of the 161 million. And when you look at just seat of the pants, 15,000 into 7 million, it's about 460 loans. That's about 77 loans per district. And I'm going to venture that there might be 77 barbershops, hair salons, and nail salons in District 4 alone. So I just wonder, is there opportunity for us to increase this amount? What can we? I think the need is really strong. And just when I have been out of the house in the recent past, you're starting to see the empty storefronts. I think the need is really strong. And I can even vouch for my own hair salon, my own hairdresser, who she shares a rent with 3 other people. And even that rent relief would be huge and cannot get anything through the banks. And so I'm glad to see it looks like we're not talking about going through banks to disperse this money, but I'm really concerned at the, what I consider pretty low amount and discuss, so.
Sure, and if Greg Bedeloff is still on here, he can speak to this. I know one of the issues with it, I think Cook County has a similar program, and for their entire county proposed $10 million. We looked at that. Obviously, we have the ability to reappropriate additional funds down the line, but we're going to have a lot of people with a lot of hands out asking for money on different projects, and we have to, from my perspective at least, and I'm not running the show here, but from my perspective, make sure that we are considering all of those, or the money, as much as it is still going to run out real quick. But Greg, can you speak to the issue of the $7 million number?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe that you hit the 2 main points on the head and how we came up with the number using Cook County as kind of a benchmark. Their program started initially with 10 million, as you mentioned. The other component that was critical for Choose DuPage is administering the program. And we felt that if we went to 15 million or 20 million in one fell swoop right off the bat, that the administration of the program on the front end would become very burdensome for Choose DuPage staff, and ramping up from an administrative perspective to cover a loan program of that size would be difficult. So we recommended that if we go through the 7 million quickly, that we, for lack of a better term, reserve the right to come back to the county board to ask for an additional tranche of money and do the program all over again.
You're bending the curve.
A quick follow up to that question. At this point, Choose DuPage is not proposing to increase staff at this point. Is that correct?
Well, we have 2 part-time kind of contract employees right now who work between 25 and 30 hours per week. and they have both indicated that they would be willing to step up their hours. The way we have the contract with them is they're flexible, and as workload increases or decreases, so does their commitment to Choose DuPage. So we've contacted them, and they're willing to step up and work additional hours.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Member Desart, then Member DeCiani, then Member Zay.
Thank you, Chairman. I had the same thoughts as Member Ozog, that the Small Business Relief Fund is so important. It's like, it could be the difference between making it through surviving these unprecedented times or shuttering forever. So the $7 million seemed kind of low to me as well. So another question, Choose DuPage will receive a $50,000 stipend to administer the Small Business Relief Fund. How will that money be spent? Because I too thought maybe Greg would be hiring additional staff, but he said no. I know there's some outreach that will be involved. You said some Facebook ads, but how will that $50,000 be spent?
So
it's not a stipend, it's what they anticipate the cost of administration would be, and they would submit the cost of reimbursement.
Thank you, Chairman Larson, for clarifying the semantics, but I'm just wondering from Greg.
So we believe that based on the number of applications that we receive and the current staffing that we have, and as I mentioned, if our part-timers need to step up to full-time, we have that covered in our budget from a employee perspective. The additional costs, the biggest cost is the web portal, which has to have capacity, which we don't currently have, and security if we receive any sensitive business information. And we will be asking, in some cases, for sensitive business information. Additionally, the cost to build out the webinar. We want to do 2 very professional webinars for businesses that are applying. So those are the 2 biggest costs. And then there is some additional marketing and outreach that we're planning on doing over and above what we currently do. I've already received estimates from our marketing folks and some internal staff, and those numbers right now are around $8,000. So we feel that between the $8,000 that we know we're going to have to spend just to put the infrastructure in place,
Sure.
along with if we need to bring interns in, as you could, I'm sure you all know, there's lots of, we're heading into the summer months. There's lots of really bright college minds that have financial degrees that had internships lined up for over the summer that are no longer available to those minds. And if we need to use those folks to help with sorting out the initial reviews, it would be our intent to see if we could reach out to people like the College of DuPage or other DuPage County-based universities to see if they might have some financial interns that could help us with the sorting of the information initially.
So there might be some additional staff hired on a part-time basis. So my next question is, does that $50,000 come out of the CARES Act money that we received, or does it come out of the county's general fund?
My thought is that it would come out of the CARES since it's COVID related.
Gotcha. Thank you.
DeCiani.
Thank you, Chairman Larson. I appreciate this program. I think is very key. I echo the other members, Ozog and Desart, who are, definitely this is an important thing to keep our small businesses going. I look at this as a 2-approach scenario. Number one, if we're going to look at 15 employees, the average, as a small business, I'm actually here at my office now, I look at about each employee generating about $100,000 per employee in revenue for their company. So I was going to recommend that we move our 1 million to 1.5, because I think there's a lot of small businesses, including restaurants and retail businesses that do just over $1 million. That would increase about another 1,000 to 1,500 businesses from the 18,600 or so that are eligible under $1 million. And again, we don't know if they've received PPP or not, but if they have received PPP like I have, then I would not be eligible. But I think a lot of these little guys did not get PPP or the disaster relief and really could use the help. I too would like to increase the 7 million to maybe 10, but in talking to Greg Bedeloff, he's all supportive of moving the 1 million to 1.5, but he's a little concerned about the extra money initially because of the amount of time it would take to review the applications and get these dispersed. So I would forego the increase in money to get the increase in revenue, and then ideally come back with a second round as quickly as possible should we run out of money quickly, which I anticipate we will. But I think we could have hopefully a win-win here. But I think if we open up the window a little bit more, we're going to help a lot of these restaurants that are, either shut down or on life support. I know in my town, you go to Elmhurst, you go to Villa Park, talking to my mayors, this would be a big help and really give the lifeline of America, our small businesses, the opportunity to stay in business, hopefully, and get through this. So that would be my consideration, is moving that 1 million to 1.5. It would only increase about another 1,500 or so businesses to be eligible. But I think those key businesses, based on the number of 15 employees, would be respective of those needs and not put a burden on the review process. And then I would hope that we can get a second round of funding should we run out quickly to help as many as we can. So hopefully this can be done thoughtfully, but it's important because as we all know, these small businesses are really taking a beating right now. Thank you.
Okay, Member Zay, Member Rutledge, Member Hart, and then Member Chaplin.
Thank you, Chairman Larson. This plan is to augment the federal programs, SBA, PPP, and I agree with everybody. I mean, I agree with going to the 1.5. My problem, I'd like to increase it too, but again, we don't want to get in the area where Greg can't handle it. That would be the worst thing we would do, is to increase it, and then we have a problem that we've seen with the state with unemployment, where we can't administer a program the right way. We do all the work and then we have problems, just getting it dispersed. So if Greg is telling us 7 million right now is the number, I have to go with his expertise. And I know if, like he said in his presentation, if we get to a point where we have exhausted those funds, they will come back to the county and then we can reappropriate that money. But the last thing we want to do is overwhelm it and not be able to get that money quickly out to people because we've put additional money out there. We want to get it out there, augment the federal programs and help these businesses. And, I say hopefully they don't need it, but we know they do. So maybe in a month or so, Greg will be coming back to us and we'll have to do an additional appropriation of millions of more dollars for this program.
Thank you. Member Rutledge.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm going to echo a little bit of what Pete said about the restaurants, that it doesn't take a very big restaurant to exceed $1 million in annual revenue. And I've got a couple restaurants in my area that are bleeding $20,000 a month, just trying to stay afloat. And so I guess my question is, what is this going to offer to people that are just over that $1 million cap? And is there going to be a space for them eventually? And what's the answer I can give to those constituents?
Okay, thank you. Member Hart, then Member Chaplin, Member Tornatori, then Member Krajewski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Greg, thank you so much for a very well thought out and what I believe is going to be a very impactful plan. I think this is spot on. I do have a question around the forgivable loans and specifically the disbursement timeline. Do we know, or do we have an idea of roughly how long from application to approval to disbursement it will take for some of these businesses to get the cash that they would be able to receive from this program?
I can talk a little bit about the timeline. If the county board approves the program today, we would announce it tomorrow on our website. We would conduct the webinars on Friday, and we would formally open the portal on our website on Monday of next week. Begin taking formal applications Monday of next week. As I mentioned, I believe that it's based on what I've seen from other county programs similar to this and other municipal programs similar to this. We're probably looking at leaving the website portal application open for 2 weeks, let's say. From that, now we are going to be reviewing those applications as they come in on a daily basis. But I expect that 2 weeks after the website portal is opened, we would have our kind of first tranche of businesses that we would be screened, have been screened and recommended to our loan committee, who we would convene virtually. And hopefully within the very same day, 24 to 48 hours, have that committee either agree, disagree, hash it out, and then provide that list to the county board for your approval. So even if we added a week on the back end of that, I'm hoping that within 3 weeks of opening the portal, we would get the first tranche of recommended businesses to you all, or at least to county staff. I've been working with the finance committee, or the finance staff rather. You know, I don't have familiarity with how long it takes for the county to cut a check and put it through its processes, I believe ERP and the like. But the conversations that I've had with staff have indicated they might be able to turn it around as quickly as 2 to 3 weeks. So in a perfect world, Member Hart, I'm going to say 6 weeks from application to the time the business has the check in their hands. In a real world, it's probably closer to 7 to 8 weeks. And again, the 7 million, I believe, and the business community, I believe, thinks that the quicker that we can get the money in the hands of the businesses, the more impactful it will be. Some businesses might not have 8 weeks, to be blunt, but to be respectful of county processes, in the state's attorney's opinion and others, we felt it was best to have the county disperse the funds.
Great, thank you, Greg.
Kaplan?
Did you call on me, Chairman?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. So do we want to have for this? Oh, hold on a second. Sorry.
Entitled to his say.
Sorry, they're getting outside. With regards to this small business, you know, it is on the agenda. So should we ask our questions that we have with this small business loan right now, or should we wait until the item comes up on the agenda? That's because it sounds like we're having the conversation right now, and
We'll probably have it again then. I just wanted to give everyone an opportunity to speak while we were going through the whole presentation.
so would you then suggest to wait to hold on my questions till it comes up to the item then?
We can do that. Certainly, I'm not going to entertain any motions to amend or to approve or disapprove until we get to the point where it's in the presentation.
Okay, then I'll wait. Okay, thank you.
And with that in mind, and that's a valid point, Member Tornatore, then Member Krajewski, then Member Eckhoff, then Member Covert, then Member Renahan. So I guess a lot of people want to talk about it now. Member Tornatore.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At first, I was somewhat concerned about a committee made up of non-elected officials determining who was going to get this money and how much. However, given the presentation this morning and the fact that you're going to be sitting on that committee, my concerns have been somewhat reduced. If I'm not mistaken, I believe I heard up to $15,000. I'd like to know from Greg if he could tell me how we determine how much each individual application gets what they get. In other words, if my business loses 30% of its revenue and Greg's loses 60% of his revenue, does he get twice as much as I do under the scenario? And the second part of my question is, this appears to be first come, first serve, which leads me to the concern about maybe having one particular district or area of the county inundate this committee with its applications. And we all know that if 10 million or 5 million of the 7 million goes to Naperville, not to pick on Naperville, then the rest of us are going to have some questions we have to answer our businesses. So is there going to be some allocation among district or some parameter that you're going to look at, Greg, to try to make this money dispersed in the most equitable manner possible throughout the county?
Let me answer your first question first, which I believe was how did we arrive, or how will we determine 15,000 versus 10,000, let's say. In the scenario you described, Member Tornatore, I think both applicants would probably go for the 15,000. And I think the majority of the applicants that are going to apply will be asking for 15,000. However, if an applicant is only asking for 5,000, we certainly would consider that. And based on the information that we're going to be asking for, payroll, rent, utilities, there is kind of a proof in the pudding component to the loan application, where if a applicant is asking for $15,000 worth of COVID-19 relief, but they've only presented evidence for $7,000 worth of financial relief based on what their anticipated hardship is, or how they're filling out the application in terms of rent, utilities, payroll, and or business loss, then that will determine the dollar amount that they get. I don't know if
So if a business has 15,000 or more in losses from March through the application process, then in theory, you're telling me they, with the proper documentation, could receive $15,000.
Correct.
Okay. And again, that leads me to, if you've got 5 applications and one business loses 15,000 and one business loses 30, do they both get $15,000? Or or is there some kind of prorating that you're going to use depending upon the application so that as many people get as much as we can give them?
The loan committee has expressed interest in doing exactly that, looking at some type of prorating where we try to help as many businesses as possible. What that ultimately winds up looking like, is difficult to say at this point because we don't know what the applications are. So the intent is to help as many small businesses as possible. To answer your second question, currently we are not contemplating anything other than a first come, first serve model. And when I say first come, first serve, that's why I mentioned the 2-week window. We believe that based on what we've seen from other counties and from other municipalities that are doing this, within that 2-week window, those would be the first come, first served. Now, if it exceeds the amount within, as I mentioned, if after 3 days we think the applications are going to way exceed the dollar amount available, then we would look at that window. But we have not contemplated anything other at this point than a first come, first serve model. But instead of 1, 2, 3, it's kind of first tranche, second tranche, if that makes sense.
Oh, it does. And when you say you're going to use originally you said you're going to use the entire 2 weeks, and then presumably at the end of 2 weeks, take a look at the applications. Correct. And then take those applications accordingly, except then you said that if the first 3 days looks like it's going to exceed the $7 million, then you'd essentially, if not stop the application process, that would be the first come, first serve, which again leads me to it's first come, first serve. So if I get my application in on day 1 and another business gets their application in on day 5, and in the first 3 days we've exceeded the $7 million request, which we probably will, then it is truly a first come, first serve. I think it might be more fair if you have a certain window, whether it's a week or whether it's 2 weeks or whatever period of time you think is appropriate, and put all those applications in the hopper, and then you look at them regardless of when they're time stamped, because otherwise it's going to be a mad scramble to the post office or to their computer to get this application in as quickly as possible. And again, I still have some concerns about the districts and how this money is going to be allocated among the entire county. I understand that there are more restaurants and more businesses in certain segments of the county. I appreciate that, and I would expect that those areas are going to get more applications, are going to get more money. I'm just concerned that we don't overwhelm one part of the county and another part of the county is the redheaded stepchild with their nose against the window asking for money, and then we're out of it. So those are my concerns.
And let me just address that, because we've talked about the fact, and obviously it sounds like the sense of the committee is that people are prepared to commit to more money to the program when and if it becomes exhausted. And that may address some of those concerns in terms of, okay, just like with the Paycheck Protection Program, yeah, everybody rushed to get in there. Some people were left out of it. So then more money was authorized for those who are a little bit less quick to the trigger. If we put it all out at once, it's going to only exacerbate the problem of one area or the quickest to the trigger getting all of the funds. So we can space it out. We'll see who applies it originally. If that money gets exhausted, we can always look for additional expenditure of funds to pick up those who didn't get into the program initially. So with that, I'll move on to Member Krajewski, then Member Eckhoff, then Member Covert, then Member Renahan, then
I'm okay, forget it.
Member Healy.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And Greg Bedeloff, very good job in putting this program together. We need to get this money out as quick as possible. I think you'll find out in a couple of days it'll be closed, but 8 weeks to get that money to somebody, in my opinion, is unacceptable. There's no way. As Member Ozog said, there's only 500 people at 15,000. The day that those things come out of your loan committee to our county, you mentioned every 2 weeks the county board will get a list to approve. We should have a Zoom meeting with our county board to say, okay, we approve it. And I don't know what finance has to do, but there's no way it should take 4 weeks to cut a check, or 3 weeks or 2 weeks. Once we give approval, they should have everything in place and they can work on it now. But as soon as it comes out of that loan committee, I don't see, we have a Zoom meeting, our county board approves those list of businesses, and finance should be able to cut a check the next day. I don't know why the procedures are there, and we need to look at those quickly because we can't wait 8 weeks to get the first tranche of checks there. That's it. Thank you.
Who's next? Member Eckhoff.
I would just emphasize what Mr. Tornatore and Krajewski said. I would like to see the program open for a certain period of time, evaluate what comes in, and pay out on a pro rata basis once you hit the $7 million, because I think it's important to get money to as many people as possible. And if you can't get the entire 15,000 to them, they can come back a second time to get up to that level. But I think it's important to hit as many people as possible. Also, what Mr. Krajewski says, I think it's important to get it to them as fast as possible. And that's why I would not increase the amount of revenue that an applicant can have from 1 million to 1.5, because it's my understanding that Choose DuPage has already looked at the number of companies in the county, and we've got 15,000 that are at $1 million or less. So it's not like we're searching for companies to apply for this. And if it goes up to 1.5 million, you increase that to 18,000. So we've got plenty of companies at 1 million or less that can apply for this. We're going to come back. We're going to meet again just normally in 2 weeks. If Choose DuPage finds out that they've already exhausted the 7 million or that they're not getting enough applicants, we've certainly got time at a regular meeting to increase the 7 million or to increase the limit from 1 million to 1.5. And as Mr. Krajewski said, if we need to have an emergency meeting next week, a Zoom meeting to approve some of this or to take some of that additional action, I'd be in favor of doing that as an emergency.
And let me just ask Nick or Stan if you can speak to how quickly you think checks could be issued when and if this board approves the expenditure. And I do think it does require approval of this board because we are ultimately responsible for every dollar that's spent under this program. Nick?
I don't know, Stan, if you want to say it, but yes, we did check on this and we can significantly beat that 2 to 3 weeks for cutting checks. There are multiple departments involved. Obviously, whenever we get the pay list from Greg, it'll be verified through the auditor, then it'll be processed through finance, and eventually cut by Gwen Henry and the treasurer. But we think we can have these checks cut in under a week. I mean, it just obviously depends on how many come in at one time, but we will do everything in our power to get them out. The only question that we'll have to answer would be the authority of actually cutting the checks. I know you mentioned about having a Zoom meeting once a week. We were actually trying to figure out if there's a way to cut the checks, have them sitting there, and then we have a weekly meeting. So we're trying to figure out how to cut that time down significantly.
I mean, theoretically, the board could designate authority to somebody below the full county board to do that if we want to do that. And we can address that at the time we actually vote on this. Just throwing that out there. So with that, Member Covert.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Greg, thank you for doing such a great job on this program. I appreciate it. I just had one question. Do people do small business owners that are applying for this loan, do they have to, can they apply for this loan without applying for the PPP, or do they have to exhaust their federal options first before they apply for the Choose DuPage loan?
We don't have any restriction contemplated that would prevent somebody from applying for PPP and this loan at the same time.
Thank you.
But if they receive PPP funds, they are not eligible for these funds.
Correct.
Member Renahan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Greg, for all your work on this. When I first read it, the 7 million seems low. I anticipate a second wave, and I'm very supportive of that. I agree time is of the essence in pushing the money out. I think the answer you're going to say is it's a first come, first serve, but I do think my recommendation is to have an eye to whether it be district or type of business, because I think we'd hate to see everything go just to restaurants, leaving out, let's say, barbershops or, you know, local entities. I just want to make sure that, you know, as you are doing the evaluation process, as you're drawing that up, that we do have an eye to it, because our districts are drawn with equal amount of residents in district. And I think Member Tornatore brings up a good idea in terms of that. Thank you.
Just, of course, every layer of review and analysis that goes into determining how the money goes is going to delay the process of disbursement. Just throwing that out there. Member Healy, then Member Ozog. Member Healy? Yeah, that's you.
I can barely hear you. What?
You're up next.
Okay. If they've already taken a PPP loan, are they good? Can they take ours also?
No.
What if they've taken a loan through another source, such as a couple of the cities are doing it with CDBG dollars? Will they be allowed to do it?
Greg, I don't know if that was built into the program or not.
I can barely hear you.
If those, can you hear me, Member
Yes,
Healy?
I can hear you.
Okay, I believe Member Chairman also asked me to address that question. The short answer is no. If they've received municipal funds through CDBG dollars that were COVID related. So if the municipality had a COVID funding that they chose to allocate, I believe Aurora is doing something and Itasca is doing something, that would preclude them from qualifying for this loan.
Okay, thank you.
Rosa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In terms of equity, Member Renahan made a point about our districts are based on population and fairly even. And I'm wondering if we can somehow talk about some way of stratifying these loans, looking at perhaps gig 1099 versus restaurant versus either independent contractor or business salons, that kind of thing, some kind of a stratification, and then perhaps can think about some sort of a lottery in terms of making it more equitable, because first come, first serve, I mean, we may be looking at a date stamp where, you know, what in the possibility of where we have 100% of the first hour is from X district and is related to X business. If you follow where I'm headed this way, I'm looking at more of some kind of a more equitable yet simple way of looking at this. And I think some form of a lottery is worth thinking about in some way, just to be as fair as we can be. Thank you.
Okay, do we have any other comments on this? Member Elliott.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think there's a lot of good ideas here, but I think the overriding concern that I hear, and I think everyone shares this, is the need to move forward quickly. And whatever suggestions we come up with today, and I've heard a lot of really good ones, I think we need to have definite parameters around this program and definite direction to Greg and his team by the time we finish our meeting. I'd like to say this morning, but I suspect it'll probably be this afternoon, because we need to get them off and running. And so I've heard from a number of people dividing it up equitably between districts. That seems to make sense to me. That feels like something that Greg and his team could do relatively quickly. I'm not certain that some of the other concepts of dividing it to industry segments or whatever, I'm not certain how quickly that can be done. I do share the concerns about a strict first come, first serve. And so, Greg, I guess I'd like to hear your thoughts and perhaps how you would respond to that. Greg, the other thing that I'd kind of like to hear from you is the one comment that I thought concerned me a little bit, or at least I had some disagreement with, was the notion that you would take the entire pool and then divide the loans equitably amongst that pool. I guess my initial knee-jerk reaction to that is I don't want to dilute the loans to the point where they're not meaningful to the recipients. You know, 15,000 might get a business through its payroll for a term, but you know, like 3,000 or 5,000 might not. And so I guess I'd kind of like to hear your thoughts on that particular proposal, Greg.
Sure. we felt at Choose DuPage and talking to the banking and financial community that the most important component of this program was getting the money in the hands of the businesses as quickly as possible. And we felt that if we went down the road of to the penny equity across all 6 districts, that would delay that process simply from a loan review and application perspective. And we thought that if we tried to tell a business who applied for $15,000 that your loan is well-meaning and worthwhile, but if we give you 15 and somebody else applied, we can't give them anything. So we're only going to give you 7,500 in an effort to give another business 7,500, that at the end of the day, we might not be having as meaningful of an impact on the businesses that were making the application as we could have. So we felt that by looking at financial hardship, payroll, rent, and utilities, those were all, and financial hardship, if we have to ask for an income statement or some financial detail, that was all very measurable and all very verifiable or provable. And that was why we chose to go down that road. And quite, if we did a kind of a program that was just splitting the money equally across, and of course the board has, it's the board's decision and we will do what the board asks, but not sure you need a loan committee if we do that. Now you just kind of verify whether or not the applicant meets the criteria and they qualify for X, and you just distribute the money. And if that's the direction that the board wants to go, I guess we could consider that.
So may I just follow up, Chairman?
Yes, briefly.
Yeah. So Greg, I think what I hear you saying is your committee is put together of banking professionals, and they're going to be doing some evaluation, at least in their opinion, on where the money is best spent. Correct. Which businesses can be best saved, which can put it to use, that sort of thing. Correct. And is your concern that if we do some sort of anyone who fills out the application gets money type program, that would sort of dilute the benefit of having those people trying to allocate the resources where it makes sense to go best?
Yes, it just wouldn't be as impactful, Member Elliott.
Okay, thanks. I think I understand your point now.
All right, I'm going to do 2 things. I'm going to take a couple more comments, and then I'm going to ask that we get through the agenda to the point where we allocate these funds. I'm also going to ask right now for a show of hands on the board who anticipates that when and if this money is exhausted, they would support additional funds going into this program at the appropriate time. So virtually everyone has indicated their support for additional funds going into it. I think that may help address some of the concerns regarding first come, first serve and how the money is allocated. I know there are other concerns. People want to make amendments or so forth to the proposal. When we get to that portion of the agenda, we can address that. With that, I'll take 2 more comments, one from Member Pachowski, then Member Zay, and then we'll move on to the agenda.
Thank you. I think getting this money out as soon as possible is the key. And if we're looking at districts, occupations, professions, we can always amend it. If most of us are looking to do a second phase of this, then I think getting it out as soon as possible, as quickly as possible, we can always amend it and modify it at a later date.
Thank you. Member Zay.
Thank you. And I understand what the members are saying for their district, but the history of the county, we don't do that for other departments. We don't say, well, I need so much money from the Department of Transportation in my district. I need so much for stormwater in my district. We do funding district wide. We don't look at it that way. So to try to start this now, I think it's only going to slow down the process. I understand, but we're not equal in who have businesses. So say if my district only has, 80 businesses that, put in for this, and somebody else's district only has 40 or 50, well, why should they be not distributed? So I think if we tried to do it by district, we would only slow down the process and not get the money to the people who need it right now.
Okay, thank you very much to the staff for the presentation and the committee for the thoughtful comments on this. Let's get through the agenda, then we'll come back to this when we get down to that. So with that, I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes of April 28th.
So move.
Second. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion in the minutes? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Those are approved. Budget transfers.
Mr. Chair, I move on FIR 35320 budget transfers.
Second.
We have a motion and a second on budget transfers. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Those are approved. procurement requisitions, finance.
Mr. Chairman, I move to combine and approve items 1 and 2 on the finance
Second.
requisitions.
Motion and a second to combine and approve those. We have a question, Member Chowski.
On the second item, is my understanding is that they're getting 20,000 less than their current contract, and they saved us about 30% lower premium. So I just want to tell them good job.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions on either of these two items under finance? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Those are approved. Health and Human Services, Jim DeCiano.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move to combine and approve items B1 through 7 on the Health and Human Services agenda.
We have a
Second.
We have a motion and a second to combine and approve agenda items 1 through 7 under Health and Human Services. Any discussion? Member DeSark.
I just wanted to point out that item 6, liquid medical oxygen, for a total contract amount of $173,492. That wasn't listed on the agenda item for it was listed in the packet, so I just wanted to make that clarification. Thank you.
Any further discussions or comments with respect to these 7 agenda items? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Those are
Aye.
Those are approved. Judicial and Public Safety, Chairman Eckhoff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would move to combine and approve judicial public safety items C1 and 2. I'd also make the additional comment regarding agenda item number 1, that this is an emergency procurement not caused by COVID-19, but by the failure of hardware in the courthouse, and that the hardware we are procuring is
Not open.
What? It's going to be open. But the hardware that we're procuring is for the public safety of the public, the deputies, and the court personnel in there. It monitors about 200 cameras. It also controls the intercom system, emergency doors, and that's why it's an emergency at this point.
Sounds like it could be a good expense to me, but maybe not. I saw somebody else with their hand up with a question or comment.
I just had a quick question about the emergency status, and only from a learning perspective, I understand the safety issues, but how did this become an emergency now, I guess?
Well, this is a 30-year-old system that we had planned to replace next year, and staff has been working keep it together, and it finally crashed. The cameras that are in use start in the tunnel. If you remember your tour of the jail, it starts at the tunnel where where the deputies bring prisoners from the jail, goes into the courthouse, goes into lockup areas, goes into the courtrooms, have cameras. And so that's why it's a safety issue, in addition to the doors and the intercom system. So
The answer is an emergency because the system crashed.
Yeah, and that's only looking for education. So thank you, both Chairman Larson and Member Eckhoff.
Renahan, you had a comment?
Yeah, similarly, I had a question in terms of, and I think this will help as we go forward with COVID. Maybe Jim McGuire can help. When it is emergency procurement, it looks like we have no bids, we have no ethics. How are we ensuring a fair price? I mean, this situation is obviously not COVID. I mean, it kind of reminds me of the 90-year-old who died suddenly. We want to make sure that, we are watching our systems, that they're not, escaping the procurement process because we waited too long. So can I just get like a 30-second roundabout on what is emergency procurement?
Yes, this is Jim McGuire. The department does determine whether the emergency is needed. One of the aspects of proving the purchase is we check to see if it's a reasonable expenditure. So we do try to verify that. But on an emergency basis, they are allowed to select a vendor that meets their needs. And usually that means in a quick fashion.
So basically, if this had gone through, let's say a year ago, when it sounds like it was very old, a 30-year-old system, it would have had to jump through all the hoops, and this time it did not, because we probably waited too long and crashed. Correct? That sound?
I'm not sure if they waited too long, but the system did crash and they have to respond. So yes, normally that procurement would have gone through a selection process that would have likely brought in different quotes.
And be clear. Thank you.
Any further comments or questions as to these items 1 and 2? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Those are approved. Public Works Chairman Healy.
Move to combine and approve items 1 through 5 of the Public Works agenda.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to combine and approve agenda items 1 through 5 under Public Works. Any discussion as to any of them? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Those are approved. Stormwater Chairman Zay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move on SMP 14220, approval of Excella contract.
Second.
And just to note, we're adding Division of Transportation due to COVID, so now they can do their submittals online.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. We have discussion. First member Chaplin, member Ozog.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. So I'm just looking at this, and this is a COVID item, and I really appreciate the agenda indicating which are COVID items. So thank you very much for putting it on there. But I'm just wondering, looks like it's it goes through. It's a renewal of a contract, and we're putting under COVID. Is that because we're adding the Department of Transportation for COVID, Jim? Is that how that's working?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Right now, only Stormwater uses Excella. Transportation and permitting does not. So because of the problem not being able to come in, we're adding Division of Transportation. They've worked with our staff to get them on. They were asked to go on this system last year. They declined. But now because of the situation with COVID, they realize this is an easier way to not have staff in and for people to be able to submit permits.
Great. Thank you.
And we're doing it for a 1-year period, so that's another reason.
Thank you for that clarification. Member Ozog had a comment.
And if I can ask, thank you, Mr. Chairman, if I can ask members A, so being able to do remote permitting, what have you, is definitely going to fall under the COVID classification. Are we confident about that? Okay.
Yes.
And that would be sort of an overriding, how does COVID change our procedures? Is that what we're looking at, or? Okay.
Exactly. It follows the guidelines.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions or comments on this item? Seeing and hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Those are approved. Technology, Chairman Hart will strike that contingent upon parent committee final approval clarification because of our current procedures.
Thank you, Chairman Larson. I move on TEP 147-20, recommendation for the approval of a contract to Alpha Technology Group LLC. And just for note, this is a software that's going to allow an increased cybersecurity regarding to the amount of people working remotely for COVID reasons.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and second on this item. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
That is approved. Transportation, Chairman Pachalski.
Thank you. I'd like to move to combine agenda items 1 through 4 under the transportation agenda.
Second.
Fine and approved.
Second.
All right, so we have a motion to combine and approve agenda items 1 through 4 under transportation. Any discussion as to any of them? Hearing and seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Those are approved.
Aye.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move to combine and approve items A through C. These are all additional acceptance and appropriation.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to combine and approve agenda items A through C under finance resolution. Any discussion as to those? Hearing and seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Those are approved.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move on FIR 34820, placing names on payroll.
Second.
A motion and a second. Any discussion on this item? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That is approved.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Move on FIR 35520, authorization of memorandum of understanding with ASME. It's a COVID item.
We have a
Second
motion.
most
and a
favorable
second.
roll.
Discussion on this item. Member DCI?
Indicate that this is, I think, a great show of respect.
Breaking up a little bit, you're very difficult to hear right now.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. This respect for our care center employees during this time of COVID, and I appreciate everybody's support. We're helping out if there is a COVID case, there's a differential paid to the care workers, and there's also a a COVID reimbursable 2% in this agreement as well. Again, we talked about what we had did last meeting to put those frontline workers in a position where we actually need them, and had to exempt them from a federal act. But in this case, we're rewarding them for their duties and putting their lives on the line in these tough circumstances. So I think it's a win-win. Thank you.
You got cut off at the beginning. You were referring to the care workers over at the DuPage Care Center.
Yes.
Any further questions or comments on this item? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Approved.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Move on FIR 35820, ratification
Second.
emergency procurement.
We have a motion and a second on this item. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That is approved.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Move on FIR 35420, creation and appropriation of coronavirus relief fund.
We have a motion and a second on this item. Any discussion?
Yes.
Rozak.
Can we get some information about interest and how we're going to handle that in the near future?
Sure. Nick, we can perhaps address that at the next Finance Committee meeting.
Absolutely. We will either that or we'll have Treasurer Henry send an email to all the board members, but either way, we'll address it.
That would be great. Thank you.
Just a reminder, interest rates are not very high right now.
No,
I understand, but on 161 million,
a little is
it's got to be a couple bucks, right? Thank you.
Member Elliott, you had a question?
I just actually have a couple questions for Cheryl, but in order to move this along, I'll address them in old business, just with this 161. But let's move this along.
Okay. Any further questions or comments on this item? Hearing and seeing none, all in favor? Oh wait, Member Start.
I just wanted to add on to what Member Ozog requested, that not only how much in interest we could possibly get from the 161 million, but also if we're allowed to spend that money on other things besides COVID things, because I know that the restrictions on how we can spend this money will be very tight. Right now they're pretty broad, but they're going to tighten according to Bill Viney, our federal lobbyist. But can we spend the interest on other things? That would be a nice, it would be nice to have an answer to that question. So thank you.
Absolutely. If we can get that as well, but hopefully it's something more like the interest penalties on taxes where it can go into our general revenue fund, but we'll get that information out to everybody.
Okay,
any further questions or comments on this item? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? That is approved.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Move on FIR 356-20, allocation of $7 million to DuPage County COVID Small Business Relief Fund.
Okay, we have a motion and a second on this item. All in favor? I'm kidding. I know people have questions.
Aye.
Member DeStiani, then Member Elliott.
As I mentioned earlier, I agree with the 7 million. I would like to get more, but I think out of respect for Greg's office, we don't want to delay the timing on this. But I would like to increase. I would like to make a motion to amend to increase the 1 million with 15 employees or less to the 1.5 million with 15 employees or less, just out of respect for those small businesses that are it's only about 1,500 extra businesses, but I think it's going to help a lot of these restaurants and tool and die shops and all different types of small businesses that have 15 employees are typically going to be over that $1 million in sales. I think that 1.5 gives us some flexibility without delaying the payment.
Okay,
I'm sorry, I couldn't
I know
hear
Member Colbert and a lot of people have questions as to what was stated because you're buffering a bit. So I'll restate what I believe the motion is that Member DeStiani, seconded by Member Elliott, moved that the portion of the proposal that would limit availability to those businesses with revenue of $1 million or less be amended to make that limit $1.5 million or less. Is that a correct statement, Member DeStiani?
That's correct.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to amend this item as just stated. Any discussion with respect to this amendment? Member Selman.
Could Greg maybe just help us understand? I don't doubt Member DeStiani's own analysis of the value of his own employees to revenue in his business, but I just wonder if Greg can help us understand. Do you generally think that each employee is about $100,000 worth of revenue? Or if you could expand on why you made the decision to keep it at $1 million? I just want to sort of have the whole picture before we vote.
Yeah, I spent 25 years in the private sector. So depending on your industry, $100,000 per employee is a pretty fair indication. You're not going to hire somebody unless they can generate that much in revenue. Some cases I've actually even seen it higher and some cases lower. We chose 15, just to let you all know, because
Not the 15, the $1 million cap is what we're talking about.
Pardon me?
Not the 15,000, but the $1 million cap. How
Yeah,
did you choose
we
that?
chose the $1 million cap. I'm sorry. Thank you, Chairman. We chose the $1 million cap because we spoke to the bankers on the Choose DuPage board to try to get a feel from them in terms of their clientele and how many of them received loans and what size those businesses were. And we were told primarily by local DuPage banks that any business that was over 2 million, some cases $1.5 million, went through the PPP program and in all likelihood got the money in the first round or has applied and is waiting in the second round. So the $1 million amount was a direct recommendation from the bankers who serve on the Choose DuPage board, who felt that a business that has 1 million in annual revenue or less oftentimes does not even have a business banker that they have a relationship with. But again, they did, in fairness to all the comments that have been made here, they did say there's not much difference from a loan perspective between $1 million and $1.5 million. And member DeCiani is correct. It would increase the pool of eligible businesses in DuPage County by about 2,000 businesses.
I appreciate
Thank you so much.
That's into his kitchen. Who is next? Member Desart, then Member Krajewski.
Thank you. I would, just my own opinion, I would prefer to keep the ramifications where they are right now, the 15 employees, the less than $1 million in annual revenue. I would prefer right now with that first initial $7 million offering, I would favor keeping things as they are. And then as we expand the program, as most of the board members raised their hands earlier and want to do that, maybe look into the 1.5 million in the second phase of this program. That's just my opinion. Thank you.
All right, Member Krajewski.
Greg, I was just wondering if you had an indication of those 2,000 extra businesses from the bankers that are on your board about how many they believe got the PPP.
I don't have that exact number, Brian. Sorry.
I mean, I agree. I think we just keep it at $1 million and just see how it goes the first round.
Okay, any further discussion as to this specific amendment? Member DeCiani, I'll let you close since it was your amendment. You're on mute.
Sorry about that. If we realize that if they've gotten PPP, they cannot apply for this loan, this would only be eligible for those 1,500 to 2,000 businesses between $1 million and $1.5 million that did not get anything. So you know, if half of them already got something, they wouldn't be able to apply for this, but we would be able to give a little bit of a safety net for those that didn't get anything. And again, these are viable businesses that we need to hopefully help and not disqualify them because they are between $1 million and $1.5 million. So again, it could be the tool and die shop here in Addison with with a dozen employees. Could be a restaurant. We got a variety of businesses that would fit this profile. And again, I'm just trying to apply a safety net. If they already got PPP, they're not even eligible. So it again, just would help in my opinion, and it would equate again to the employee count.
Okay, thank you. All right, we've had discussion on this item, which would be again to increase from 1 million to 1.5 million those entities that would be eligible to apply. We have a motion and a second. Mary, if you could take a roll call.
Member DeCiani.
Aye.
Member Eckhoff.
No.
Member Elliott.
Aye.
Member Hart.
Aye.
Member Healy.
Aye.
Member Krajewski.
No.
Member Larson.
No.
Member Noonan.
No.
Member Ozog.
Aye.
Member Pachowski.
Aye.
Member Renahan.
Aye.
Member Rutledge.
Aye.
Member Selman.
No.
Member Tornatori.
No.
Member Zay.
Aye.
Member Chaplin.
Aye.
Member Covert.
No.
Member Desart.
No.
So that's 10 voting aye, 8 voting no.
All right, the amendment is approved. We are now back to the original motion with that amended portion of the proposal. Now, do we have any further discussion or amendments with respect to the proposal as it currently exists? All right, seeing none, hearing none, I'll start with, unless anybody feels the need for a roll call.
Favor.
All right, all in favor of the proposal as amended?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right, unanimous approval. That matter is approved. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move on FIR 35720, approval agreement with Choose DuPage to administer DuPage COVID Small Business Relief Fund.
We have a motion second on this item. Any discussion?
Oh, yes.
Member Chapman.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So I just have a couple comments and maybe amendments if the board would support them. I'm looking through the contract and trying to find the part where it says grant criteria, and it says no applicant, a small business, self-employed individual, or independent contractor shall be eligible to receive funds under this program if they've received funds intended for this purpose of other sources and such as PPP and the EIDL. No applicant, whether a small business, self-employed individual, or independent contractor, shall be eligible for a grant in excess of $15,000. I think I would also like to see in there that no member of the DuPage County Board or the chairman may apply for these grants. I think to avoid the appearance of impropriety, it should be stated in that document that board members, DuPage County board members, the chairman, and our immediate families cannot apply for the grants. I also think that it should be amended that no board members of Choose DuPage or their immediate families should be eligible to apply for the grants. And if we do have a committee, I believe that, no committee member or immediate families should be allowed to be eligible for those grants. Also, in the document regarding the invoices, it says a reasonably detailed invoice. I think at a minimum, the invoice should include the description of work, hours worked, and dollars per hour. I mean, this is COVID money. I think we need to be very careful on, our expenditures and what we're expending. And I think that we should see a little bit more detailed invoices. So those would be my two recommendations for amending this part of the contract.
Okay, in terms of the second part, I'm not sure if there's a clean way of proposing that or you're just proposing sort of guidance that you would expect.
Well, it says here under compensation, it says Choose DuPage shall prepare reasonably detailed invoices. Well, I've seen some invoices that we pay where there's absolutely nothing on the invoice. So, I would like to say change that reasonably detailed to that shall prepare an invoice with description of work, hours worked, and dollars per hour.
Okay, we have, that's a motion to amend. That's the first of your motions to amend. Correct?
Yes.
All right, with respect to that, do we have a second on that motion?
Second.
We have a motion and a second to amend to add that language clarifying the requirements for submission discussion. I see Member
I have a
Colbert,
question.
Member Elliott.
Yeah. Can we ask our state's attorney to see if there's a conflict of interest from county board members or committee members or anybody?
Hold that one because we're going to come back. That's going to be a separate amendment.
Okay.
Okay. Member Elliott, did you have a question or comment with respect to the requiring more information?
So are we, I guess maybe I misunderstood. Are we taking both of Member Chaplin's proposals separately?
Yes.
I think it makes more sense to do that unless Member Chaplin.
Okay. Okay. So I don't have an issue at all with the first one. I think I don't have a problem exempting county board members and their families. On the second one, I guess more information is better than less information. So I don't disagree with that, but I guess, and maybe I'd like to hear from Greg, I'm having trouble from an underwriting perspective, trying to understand why the hourly wages of applicants' employees would be germane to the loan assessment process.
Can I just clarify that?
I'm struggling on that. Yeah.
Can I just clarify that? So having paid bills like all my life in companies, I go through invoices and I check them to make sure that, what we're invoicing, what we're paying is, a a valid expense. And not that I'm saying that won't be, but I'd like to, see on an invoice a minimum, because this is a reasonably detailed invoices. Well, I've requested invoices from the auditor of some expenses that we paid where there's a date and an amount, and that is it, and no detail of what we're paying. Being that this is COVID money, I think at a minimum, I'd like to see on the invoice, when you see invoices, it usually says description of work, hours worked, and a dollar, or how much that value of that work is worth. So we have a dollar amount associated with that numbers of hours worked. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I do. And I guess I'd like to hear from Greg, because that clarifies it, but I still don't think I understand from a loan perspective why that's relevant. I mean, I assume these are going to be FOIA-able documents, right? So just like we discussed.
Choose DuPage is not FOIA-able.
Hang on.
But the documents the loans are going to be issued through DuPage County.
This is the invoice.
Listen, everyone, hang on. We're not going to have a back and forth.
I'm sorry. I think I've got the floor.
Hold on. I understand Member Ozog wants to comment, and Member Healy wants to comment. Member Elliott has the floor. He has a question. He's asked that Greg Bedeloff answer the question. I will come back to Member Ozog and Member Healy after Mr. Bedeloff answers the question for any comments that you have. I don't want it back and forth here. Nobody can hear anybody.
We intended on keeping a very detailed list of our costs associated with administering the program and providing them to the county on as a regular basis or as a requested basis. But it would certainly be more than simply hours and wages, because as I mentioned, we're building out a website. And I don't know, do you want the hours that it took to build out the website? And do you want the rate that it took the company that we use to build out the website to share their rates? So if it's simply a matter of Choose DuPage staff who worked part-time, who were paid $25 an hour, they're now working full-time at $25 an hour or $20 an hour, or whatever the case may be. We had always intended on providing that. I think the additional information regarding the infrastructure, because we're using third parties in some cases, becomes a little more complicated for us.
And just to clarify, because I think there may be some confusion as to what we're talking about here. Member Chaplin, you're referring to the submissions from Choose DuPage to the county to account for their expenses.
Absolutely.
Yes.
That's right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. We're all on the same page. All right. Did that answer your question, Member Elliott?
Yes. Greg has answered my question. Yes.
Member Ozog, then Member Healy.
I just wanted not to put words in Member Chaplin's mouth, but I wanted to clarify that she was talking about documentation from Choose DuPage. So we're good.
Thank you.
Thank
Member
you.
Healy?
Wouldn't we always be able to get more information from Choose DuPage if we needed it?
I suppose we could get it up front or whatever. But... Okay, any further questions or comments on this matter? All right, so we have a motion to amend to ask for additional information as specified by Member Chaplin from Choose DuPage when they are accounting for their expenses related to the administration of this program. And we have a motion and a second on that amendment. Without further discussion, we can take a roll call.
Member Chaplin.
Aye.
Member Covert.
No.
Member Desart.
Aye.
Member DeCiani.
Didn't hear you, Member DeCiani.
Aye.
Member Eckhoff.
Aye.
Member Elliott.
No.
Member Hart.
Aye.
Member Healy.
I believe that was an aye. Your mic is muted, but thank you.
Thank you.
Aye.
Member Kuczewski.
Aye.
Member Larson.
Aye.
Member Noonan.
Aye.
Member Ozog.
Aye.
Member Pachowski.
Aye.
Member Renahan.
Aye.
Member Rutledge.
Aye.
Member Selman.
Aye.
Member Tornatori.
Aye.
And Member Zay.
No.
I'm counting 15 ayes, 3 nays.
The amendment is adopted. All right, back to the original proposal as amended. Well, actually, then Member Chaplin has proposed a second amendment, which would be, and I'll try to articulate for you. Tell me if you disagree. There's a motion to amend the proposal so that no county board member nor family of a county board member, nor any member of Choose DuPage or their family members, nor any member of the committee overseeing the loans or their family members can apply for these. I guess I would ask for clarification. The businesses they work for apply.
No, yes, only if it's like a family owned, a family owned business.
Okay, so for business, they actually individually own or if they're a 1099 seeking their own personal reimbursement.
Yes.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to amend on that basis. It looks like we have discussion. Member Krajewski.
Yeah, I agree with Member Chaplin. We may want to look at like the PPP. The federal had kind of identical language, but I think it goes even farther, with family members. But you may want to look at the language they put in there. It also may include the finance department that's cutting the checks, employees that maybe they have side businesses, et cetera. But you may want to just look at the federal language, how they did it. No members of Congress, no family members, the federal departments that administer it, et cetera.
Okay, any further discussion on the amendment as stated? Member Rutledge.
Yeah, ultimately, the county board will be approving or disapproving any of these applications anyway, correct?
Yes.
So I guess I just look at this that we got part-time jobs here. I have a business that, probably would be eligible. So if we are the ones that are ultimately going to say yay or nay on this, I would be opposed to requiring or for those people to be exempt. Not that I plan on applying for any of the funds, but we all have businesses.
Okay, any further discussion on the amendment as stated? All right, seeing and hearing none, roll call, please.
Member Chaplin.
Aye.
Member Covert.
No.
Member Dessart.
Aye.
Member DeCiani.
Aye.
Member Eckhoff.
Aye.
Member Elliott.
Aye.
Member Hart.
Aye.
Member Healy.
That's an aye. I believe he's muted still.
Member Krajewski.
You're right.
Aye.
Member Larson.
Aye.
Member Noonan.
Aye.
Member Ozog.
Aye.
Member Pachalski.
Aye.
Member Renahan.
Aye.
Member Rutledge.
No.
Member Selman.
Aye.
Member Tornatori. Member Say.
No.
Is that 15
And
ayes?
that's 15 and 3.
All right, that amendment is adopted. Any further? All right, so we have the two amendments. I believe we've covered your.
Chairman Larson.
Member Chaplin, is that correct?
Yes, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Chairman Larson.
Yes, Mr. Bedla. Or no, I'm sorry. Connor McCarthy, please.
Because you've amended the prior authorizing resolution to authorize up to 1.5 million, you should amend the agreement with regards to grant criteria in that same amount. In order, otherwise you have a conflict.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to amend the criteria under this proposal as well that would increase the eligibility for businesses with revenue of 1 million up to 1.5 million. Any discussion, questions, or comments on this amendment? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
No, Eckhoff voting no.
Show member Eckhoff voting no, 17 ayes, 1 no. That amendment is adopted. Any further questions, comments, or amendments to this agenda item?
Just, Mr. Chairman,
Yes, member Zay.
if we continue this, I know we get these agendas earlier, but it would be so much easier if somebody, I know people just didn't wake up this morning and had these ideas. If you want to amend something, in fairness to the board members, email those amendments prior to the meeting, so this can run a lot smoother. It would be a lot easier. We went through it last week, we're going through it this week. It would be a lot easier for our staff, easier for the board members to follow where we're going, so we know ahead of time where these amendments are going to be.
I've mentioned that before, and I know there are sometimes things that are thought up on the fly. I would say, and there's a reason why, and I do this because I'm an appellate attorney, why I restate the motions to make sure we're very clear on the language, because staff has to capture what's been proposed in the amendment very precisely so that when we vote on these items, they can incorporate it into what we've done. And when we do it verbally, it's a little bit more difficult for them to do that. So thank you, Vice Chairman, for that clarification. Member Ozog, you had a comment? And then member
In all fairness, there are several questions that I had asked via email about both of these proposals, and I didn't really receive information back, simply that it would be sort of elucidated during this meeting, which it was during our first presentation. But it's not really seat of the pants. It's really more questions I asked really weren't answered until today as we proceeded. So I'm afraid that's not necessarily going to work to submit amendments.
To the extent people are anticipating an amendment that they know they're going to bring, we would ask that they can submit it and submit it in writing so that we can fully capture and very carefully capture exactly what they're proposing. But obviously, we're doing things based upon information. People's views change based upon the discussion. That's why we have these meetings, and it's perfectly appropriate. No one, I hope members A, I don't think anybody's proposing that we should not be able to submit these. But when you anticipate an amendment that's going to be very specific, and you're going to bring it to the meeting, it is helpful to provide it in writing so that everybody anticipates it in advance, and we're going to capture it more precisely. Member Desart, you had a question or comment?
I just had a comment that I think it's always, a lot of these conversations need to be held in the public forum, and I think it's always best to err on the side of transparency.
I agree wholeheartedly. Members A, say no. Okay. Any further questions, comments, or discussions with respect to this item as amended with those 3 separate amendments? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, it is approved with those amendments as presented. We are on to informational.
Mr. Chairman, I move to receive and place on file A, county board, B, payment of claims, C, appointments, D, grant proposal notifications.
Second.
Second.
I have a motion to receive and place on file all of those items. Any discussion with respect to any of them, recognizing they are informational? Member Elliott.
Mr. Chairman, please just show me not voting on this.
Okay, show Member Elliott metaphysically leaving the room for purposes of this vote. With that noted, all those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed?
Aye.
17 aye, no opposed.
Wyckoff's voting aye.
Say again? Oh, Member Eckhoff, thank you. So those are received and placed on file. Do we have any old business?
I just had,
Go ahead, Member Elliott.
I just had one question for Cheryl. When we walked through the presentation, I didn't really understood that we had gotten to the part where we were talking about the allocation of the 161 million. Cheryl, are you still on?
Yes.
All right. So I've been getting some communications from the municipalities in my district. My guess is other members have as well. And am I correct? Because this is the way I read the memo that went out last week, and it's the way I understood the presentation this morning. Am I correct that of the 4.9 billion that was allocated by the federal government to the state of Illinois, that 1.4 billion of that was for counties and municipalities that exceeded a certain size, and that's where we got our 161 million, right?
Correct.
And am I correct that of the remaining 3.5 billion that the state is supposed to be coming up with some sort of program to share that with or get some of that money to the municipalities?
Correct. Our state lobbyist, Chip Humes, has talked to the governor's office. They do plan to allocate monies to all units of government, even those that, so say municipalities in DuPage, they do plan to allocate monies to them. This is the information we have as of today. However, nothing precludes you from also providing a distribution, but the state, in theory, is supposed to share their monies with units of government that did not receive an allocation.
Okay, and so do we know from a timing perspective, do we know if and when the state plans to come up with that? Because it would be extremely useful for me, and I'm assuming to others, in trying to craft what we're going to do with our portion to know whether the state actually intends to give money to municipalities in DuPage County, and if so, how much and when.
Agreed. I think the issue is, as you know, they haven't been in session and they haven't scheduled a session date yet. That's why Chairman Cronin has talked with the mayors. He's recommended as a first step. It's not the end, just like with the business program, you're going to have another one as a first step We've asked every municipality for a spreadsheet of their commodities, their hard expenses, such as sanitizing products and laptops and PPE, stuff that you could look at a spreadsheet. Villa Parks had an excellent one yesterday that listed all their costs that would not require a deep dive into percentage of payroll or something that's more complex that we just can't do right now for 33 municipalities. But they had requested $104,000, and I just eyeballed it and sent it to the auditor. We have to develop an internal process, but it looked totally appropriate. So that's our first step, where we could find us, develop a certification for each mayor to sign, an IGA, and get that money out the door to those municipalities that have incurred COVID response expenses. That doesn't mean we couldn't do another one, but I think that's why Chairman Cronin's trying to structure an immediate program with some more structure around it, because you can't take on every expense for 33 municipalities, and we don't have the bandwidth to go and do a deep dive into all the paperwork that would be required by the Inspector General.
So, and I'm struggling. I mean, we're trying to find a way to plug every hole we can that's caused by this COVID issue. That's why we handled the property tax issue last week. That's why we did the 7 million today. And I think we have to be responsive to municipalities, but is the state actually required to share that with municipalities, or are our municipalities or the county at a risk where if the state just does nothing and then the county winds up reimbursing these expenses, the state at some point just says, you know what, we don't need to give it to them because it looks like the county already took care of it?
No, and that's an excellent question, and I would defer to the state's attorney's office. I didn't see anything in the CARES Act legislation that says states are required, but in all the NACO documentation that I've received, it says it's expected. So I'd have to, I can't say it's required, but that's certainly the expectation that states share their allocation.
I mean, what is there? Expected and required are two totally different concepts. Is there any consequence for the state of Illinois if they just don't meet and decide not to allocate this to our municipalities?
I can't answer that. Yeah.
Okay.
I have to check into it.
Never decide yet. Comment under.
Yeah. I just wanted to join in Member Elliott's conversation about this CARES Act money. We got $161 million from the federal government, and talking to Bill Viney, our federal lobbyist, the challenge with spending this money is that right now the restrictions are so broad. They're so broad, but even 3 to 5 years down the road, we could be audited and those restrictions would be much more complex. So when it comes to sharing some of this money with our municipalities, and I'm all for that, we need to start the process, the internal process of how our municipalities can, make sure the money is spent as COVID money. This is the challenge that we're facing, because 3 to 5 years down the road, we could be responsible for those dollars that we've given municipalities if they don't spend the money correctly within the process of the federal government. That was just my comment. That spending this money is going to be very, very challenging, because right now the restrictions are broad, and in 3 to 5 years they could be tightened up, and then we could be liable for the millions of dollars.
You're absolutely correct.
Cautiously, and we have to, we're the ones who are ultimately signing off on these expenditures.
Exactly.
And in addition, Member Elliott's comment, which is a fair comment, there are a lot of things that we need to take care of in DuPage County, including potentially expanding the program we just approved of.
Exactly.
If we're handing out the money to the municipalities and then the state says, hey, the $3.5 billion that we got, well, we don't have to give that to their municipalities because they already took care of it. Well, we've just cheated our taxpayers out of that money, that their portion of the money that should have come from the state. Which is why I think we have to do this in a thoughtful, considered way. I agree with your comments. I appreciate it. Member DeCiani, I see you had your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Cheryl, do you know on the state money that they have, are they going to be using that at all for the unemployment side, or is that a separate pot of money? Because my only concern would be if that's the case, if it's in the same pot, that I would see a lot of those dollars going to unemployment, given what's happening right now.
I'd have to check into that, member. I'm not 100% sure. Yeah.
Okay. You can let me know. That'd be great.
Any further questions or comments under old business? Anything under new business? All right, I know tech folks will probably need, how long will you need to switch over to county board?
Just 5 minutes or so.
Okay, So give us 5 minutes. So any further discussion? Hearing none, without objection, we are adjourned. Thank you.